Thanks very much, everyone. Can you see my first slide, which says from thesis to dissertation, blah blah? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sylvia, for your introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I am a terrible timekeeper, so I really don't mind if you tell me to stop. And I would like to try and stop by at least 50 minutes before the end. So if you wouldn't mind just giving me a shout when it's about 20 minutes before the end of the hour, so that we can have some discussion. It's a kind of talk that we could sort of exit at any time. I have also shared the slides, which can be made available to you afterwards. So thanks very much for asking me. I'm just going to start off just talking about some of the rules, which are, I don't think, I certainly was never told when I was a student. At all universities, certainly in South Africa, the intellectual property for the work you do as a master's or a doctoral student or an honor student or whatever is owned by the university. And the same goes, in fact, for intellectual output. So if I am being employed by Stellenbosch University and I write an article, the university owns it, and that can become quite important for some of the things that I have to say later. Some of our funding at the university comes from subsidy generated through the subsidy system, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, but at Stellenbosch University, that money pays for things like having a library week, partly, having the excellent library services that we do, having the excellent research support services that we do. So for me, it's an absolute privilege to be able to feel that I'm contributing in some sort of a way as an author to the services that I get from the university. Then there's an ethical issue about publishing. If these days people can access your master's or your PhD online, so it's your data are accessible. But say you're working on a master's and you never finish, or you're working on a doctorate and you never finish, you in fact have an ethical obligation to your research participants, if they're people or animals who you inconvenience in some sort of way, or you put them through some sort of tests or something, for your findings to be published. So it's not ethical just to get people to participate in my research and nobody hears about it. I mean, there are broader ethical issues about who you should inform and so on. But from a publishing point of view, either a master's or a PhD, something that's available, or preferably an academic publication, and preferably both, because people, generally speaking, will not read your master's and your PhD. Who reads your master's and your PhD? We'll get to this. Your examiners, your supervisor, you hope, and possibly members of your family, and generally speaking, that's it. This is important. If you move from Stellenbosch University, so say you're doing a doctorate now and you finish at Stellenbosch and you then get a postdoc at Nelson Mandela University in Quebec, the intellectual property remains at Stellenbosch. So when you publish from your PhD, you must publish from Stellenbosch. That also has subsidy publications. You must publish your address, or the should be from Stellenbosch. You can put a note and you can say, now I'm at this other place, but actually the work that you did at Stellenbosch belongs to Stellenbosch. It's the same. I moved from UCT years ago to Stellenbosch, and I was already at Stellenbosch, but still publishing stuff from UCT. Academic staff are appraised for tenure, promotion, getting grants through publication. So that's our bread and butter. It's getting increasingly difficult so quite apart from whether you're required to do this or not, if you want to get ahead, if you want bursaries for future degrees, or you want to get postdocs, part of how we separate or we can get 100 excellent applications for one postdoc position. If you've already published from your PhD, it already puts you ahead of everybody else. It makes a really good impression. Or if you're going for a grant or anything. So this has certain implications. Your master's or your PhD is not just your own. It belongs to the university, and it belongs in part also to your supervisor. Always inform your supervisor about publications. Generally speaking, you'll be the first author. This is the way that we tend to do it in our faculty anyway, and there'll be subsequent authors. There'll be co-publishing. If you don't want to publish from your master's or doctorate or your honors or your postdoc, then you should inform, you're sick of it, you actually want to have a real life and you want to go and work on a boat somewhere or something, and you're not interested, you should inform your supervisor that you give them permission to publish from the work that you've done, so that the work can still get out there, and you can negotiate any kind of authorship issues. It's very sad when someone disappears from the university and we can't find them. There's work that really should be published, and we can't find the person. So if you're wanting to sort of leave academia, which might be a very healthy thing to do, please tell your supervisor and give them permission about publishing. So there are three key differences. I'll give you a little table later that goes into this in more detail between your master's or your doctorate and a scholarly article. The first is your audience. Basically, your audience is very small for your master's or your PhD, 2 or 3 people. Whereas for a scholarly article, it'll be other academics, most of whom you'll never meet, you'll never know, you'll never see them. What is your purpose? Well, with a thesis or a dissertation, I always say to my students, all you have to do is convince 2 or 3 people that they can't bear to fail you. But your purpose is a different one when you're publishing, because you're then entering into a global conversation, generally speaking, particularly if you're publishing in international journals in your field. And most master's degrees and doctorates pass. It's very, very hard, particularly at doctoral level, to fail someone, to fail somebody. But most academic articles are rejected many times. They may be accepted, on subsequent rounds. Okay, so given that there are all of these high rejection rates, why should we even bother, apart from the university saying we have to? I always say that it's sad but true. Academics are addicted to humiliation. Here I am, I'm over 70 years old. I still get things rejected by journals, often. And I think we're like, what am I doing? But when people have a sort of fantasy that when you're old and experienced and you've published a lot and you're a journal editor, but I go through the same anonymous things, people telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, etc., etc. And I do that really, really often, so I must be something of an addict to this. But rejection is never about you personally, but it's part of a complex system of quality control of science. And the only method of quality control that we have, and I'm using the word science broadly, in research in general, is peer review. We don't have anything better. There's no objective kind of measure. So this is part of the process of quality control. But it's also, I have to tell you, quite fun to have your name on a paper. I still get a kick out of it. So this paper that I am the last author on, that I'm showing you over here, is something we published this year. The first 2 authors are postdocs with me. The third author is a master's student. And it's fun. It's nice, but it's also, if I think about this paper in particular, we are making some claims about informal migrant care systems that nobody else has made. And we said, you've left out something. You've left out something. You're not thinking enough about ambivalence. You're not thinking about, these sort of complex things. And if we're lucky, people will pick this up, and we actually have an opportunity to change the field and to develop the field, and that really is quite fun. So why did I put at the beginning "killing your darlings"? It's not because of the movie with Harry Potter. What's his Daniel Radcliffe was in it, but the title of that movie actually came from something that's very familiar for people who do creative writing, and I do creative writing, as was mentioned. I also have a PhD in English. Arthur Quiller Couch, who was a very famous literary critic known as Q, had a wonderful sort of saying about writing in general. Whenever you feel an impulse to perpetrate a piece of exceptionally fine writing, obey it wholeheartedly and then delete it before sending your manuscript to press. And he said, murder your darlings. And people will often talk about killing your darlings. Now, what we tend to talk about it when in general is, you think you've got this, you've put something so beautifully in some of your writing, and that's often the piece of writing you have to kind of get rid of, your darling that you have to get rid of. But in the process of turning a thesis or a dissertation into an academic article, there's also quite a lot that you have to kill in a sense, that you have to get rid of in order to get to the article itself. So it is not simply a question of cutting and pasting. There'll be some cutting and pasting, but if all you do is cut and paste from a thesis, I'm an experienced journal editor, I can see it at 500 pages, and you will tend to be rejected. There's nothing worse than, sometimes what people even do, in my experience as a journal editor, they just send me their thesis and say, I want this to be an article. It's not an article, it's a thesis. It's a different kind of output. And one of the most difficult things to do when you're starting to publish from a thesis or a dissertation is to rework and to rewrite for the audience of the journal that you're working for, that you are writing for. So here is a bit of a summary. With a thesis, you've got a small specialized audience in your field. Whereas in a journal, it's a much bigger audience and you don't actually know the people. You're writing defensively in a thesis. Basically, you're saying to your examiners on every page of your thesis or dissertation, you're saying, don't fail me, don't fail me, don't fail me. Whereas you write slightly differently for academic journals in particular. I'm focusing here on academic journals, but the same goes for academic books and other kinds of outputs. You're part of a discussion with other academics. You're engaging. Your thesis or dissertation is all about you as a student, but actually, when you're writing for publication, it's generally not about you. They generally don't know who you are or care who you are. If you just think, I haven't got time to do a little poll on this call, but if you think about the last 5 articles, academic articles that you've read, I would be very surprised if you knew the names of the authors. Possibly, probably most of you would know none of the names of the authors. You might know the names of the authors. You don't know what university they're at. You don't know what continent they're on, because you're not actually interested in who they are. You're interested in what they've written. So it's very different. To go through a thesis or a dissertation, as I'm sure you all know, there's a lot of box ticking. So, for example, in my department, the Department of Psychology, where I still work, even though I'm emeritus, a lot of my colleagues say you have to have every thesis or dissertation has to have a section marked theoretical framework. And that's a box you have to tick. Many of my colleagues want that. But what you have to do when you're writing for a journal is to do what the journal wants, not what your department wanted. And in fact, I can remember an example where I had a student who had written something in the format of an article for her master's, and she didn't have a section called theoretical framework. And one of the examiners in my department said that, this can't pass because there isn't a section called theoretical framework, and it'll never get published without a section called theoretical framework. So we stuck in a section for the masters called theoretical framework. I knew what journal we were going for. It's a journal called Transcultural Psychiatry. I don't think there are hardly any articles in that particular journal that have a section called theoretical framework. When we submitted to the journal, we took out this section marked theoretical framework, and it got published in the journal. So there are different rules. In the one, you're doing the rules for your department and your faculty, but with journals, you're following the journal's rules. Generally, in a thesis, also, you've got to show that you know lots of things about your field, you know lots of things about methods and so on, lots of detail. The trick with academic writing, if you think about it yourself as a consumer of academic articles, you want things that are to the point. You don't want extra nonsense. You don't want a whole long thing that you already know. You want to know only, as a reader, what's relevant to me reading this particular article. So as an author for an academic journal, you have to know things, but show only what is relevant to your question. One of my particular bugbears that I've seen, I was reviewing an article for the journal Qualitative Health Research, and there were about 4 pages in the submission. It was obviously from a thesis about what qualitative research is and why qualitative research is important in health. The journal is Qualitative Health Research. Now, the readership of that journal presumably already know what qualitative research is, and they don't need to be convinced that we need qualitative research in health, because then they probably wouldn't be reading that journal. It was just a waste of 4 pages that were obviously important in the person's thesis or dissertation, but were completely useless, or in fact worse than useless, in the journal article. So with a thesis or a dissertation, you're trying to show people I'm clever. But in an academic journal, what you're trying to do is we're part of a conversation. I'm conversing with you. With both of them, with a thesis and a dissertation, you've got to provide an appropriate context. But with an academic journal, it's got to be appropriate context for readers of this journal. So, for example, I edit the South African Journal of Science. If you're writing from South Africa on your work on the use of digital healthcare in HIV, you do not have to explain to the readership of the South African Journal of Science where South Africa is. And believe me, people send this kind of stuff all the time about how many countries there are in Africa and so on, because the readership of the South African Journal of Science will know that. But if you're wanting to send that same material in it, if you were sending it to a journal on digital healthcare, a journal like Digital Health, very few of the people who are writing in the journal Digital Health actually are South African. Most of them are based in the global north. You might have to give them information about the South African context that you wouldn't need for the South African Journal of Science. Most of the readership of the South African Journal of Science are not experts on HIV. You might have to give them a bit more information about HIV, but if you're writing for an HIV journal, you wouldn't have to. So you've always got to think about your audience. Okay, so just to kind of get us started on the sort of nuts and bolts of publication, all the examples that I use in this presentation are actual examples. And the first thing that you have to realize is that it can be a bit of a tough world out there. So here are some actual feedback from received by people on articles submitted for publication. In summary, this article adds nothing to knowledge. I can't see why the author bothered. And a particular favorite of mine, and I'll tell you why in a minute, the author's clearly not English speaking and needs remedial help in English before he or she should think of publishing in academic journals. Now, I don't think anybody wants to receive that kind of feedback. And I continue, these are all feedback that I myself have received when I've sent articles in for publication. What do you want to do when you get, this kind of feedback? Is you want to hide under a rock and run away. In fact, what I've done in all cases is I've just submitted to another journal, because what's the most common feature is rejection. And even if you have blind peer review, so that you don't know who your reviewers are and the reviewers don't know who you are, you get comments like the last one here. The author's not English speaking and needs some remedial help in English, etc., etc. This was commentary on my work. I am first language English. I hold a PhD in English. I teach all over the world. I help people with academic writing. There's still the prejudice. Oh, this African person, can't speak English. So there are all sorts of things that come into there. But you pick yourself up, send it to another journal. So you've got to have quite a thick skin. But I'll come on to that as we go. The other huge myth is, particularly for inexperienced people who've never published, for example, in a journal before, is that people want something that is completely original. Now, if you think about yourself, I imagine most of you are masters or PhD students or postdocs. If you think of all the stuff that you've read, you say you've read 300 articles towards your PhD, and you come to article number 301, which shows you, it's so original, it shows you that all the 300 articles you read before, you might as well not have bothered, and you've got to start again from the beginning. You will not be happy as an academic finding an article which completely throws out everything that's happened before. That's not actually what we want when we read academic journals. Stephen Sondheim, who write Broadway musicals, had a song, I will not sing it for you, in which about trying to sell a new Broadway musical to people who put up money for them, to producers. And he was saying, they say they want something original, but what do people really want? All they ever want is repetition. All they really like is what they know. Now I'm going to show you how, and this is different from in an article from a thesis or a dissertation, how you get that balance between letting people have what they know, but also adding your little bit. We're going to get there. Very important point made as a joke by Peter Collett, who was the editor of a very good journal called Journal for the Theory of Social Behavior at the time. He said a good journal article has one idea and preferably fewer. Now, obviously, that's a joke. We do not want journal articles with no ideas. But it is so commonly the case where your thesis or your dissertation is full of lots of different ideas, and it feels like your life's work. First of all, it isn't. But when you're writing an article, you are picking out from your thesis, and it might even be a short thesis, 100-page thesis. You may find that I'm picking out a small portion for this particular article. I'm focusing on one particular thing, not on a whole range of things. So you should always be able to answer the question, what is the one thing that this paper is about? What is the one big question? There may be sub-questions. What is the one big question that I'm trying to answer in this particular paper? And how do you get to this problem of the repetition and what they know? Well, when I was in high school in the 1960s, don't gasp, it was the early days of looking at advertising, and I had to read this book called The Hidden Persuaders. And he pointed out a very important thing about selling products. If you try and sell a product to somebody by positioning them as ignorant, they're not going to buy. So he gives examples of, for example, if you wanted to sell a new kind of hair shampoo to people, you will not say, you didn't know that this is good or this is completely revolutionary. you set it up in this way. You always knew that hair shampoo, which has lanolin in it, is good for your hair, but you didn't know that with our extra ingredient of, I don't know, lavender or whatever, your hair will be even more beautiful, or whatever it is. You set up your reader as an expert. That becomes very important in how you start the article from your thesis or dissertation. I'll show you how to do it in a minute. But don't do, and there's a serious example of this, just in terms of health communication. Early in the AIDS epidemic, before we had ARVs, the first thing we said to people is, you're going to die. But if you abstain from sex or use a condom, etc., maybe you won't. Nobody bought that. That messaging didn't work. We learned you have to message people where they are, and it's exactly like that for the readership of a journal. So you have to take your reader with you in what I call it a double funnel model, and we'll get there. But I'll tell you a story of I've been lucky enough in my work. I'm a psychologist by training. I have a PhD in English. I worked for quite a number of years on a very cross-disciplinary project called the South African AIDS Vaccine Initiative. We haven't got a vaccine yet, but we got a lot closer. And in fact, some of the COVID stuff that happened later was helped by that early vaccine work. But I had to go to conferences where different people would present. So the clinicians working with community populations would present, and the microbiologists would present, and the legal people would present, and the psychologists would present. And I know nothing about microbiology. So some of you on this call will know what a poll and a gag is in microbiology. I don't know. But I was sitting in Johannesburg at one of these meetings, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine who's a microbiologist, and there were 3 presentations on microbiology. And this is really, really important. And I listened to these 3 presentations, and I turned to my friend and I said to her, the first group, the science seems to me to be okay. Second group, they're hopeless. The science is terrible. And the third group, they're the ones that we've got to follow, because they're the ones most likely to actually help us find a vaccine. And my friend said, how did you know that? You don't know anything about microbiology, but you seem to understand all of that. I didn't understand all of it. I didn't. But what I was listening to was not the words, but the tune. I was listening to the structure of the way that they structured their argument, which is exactly how you structure an article for a journal. And I could just see by the way that they put things who was likely to be better and worse. And now that one of the journals that I edit is South African Journal of Science, most of what crosses my desk, I don't understand the content. And I have, you'll be pleased to know, content editors who do understand the content. So in fact, most of our work is on climate science. And one of the fun things I do for myself is I go through things, and I can generally look not at the content, but at how the person who's written this article has organized their material. And I could go to and I note down, I think this is no good, but I don't really understand all of the science. And then I wait for feedback from my content editor, and there's a very high correlation between what I think just from the structure of the article and from what the content editor said. It's actually quite astonishing. So structure and helping your reader through the structure of your article is very important. And I think, for those of you, I'm a psychologist. Some of our work is in a field called attention deficit, ADHD, so fashionable now, didn't used to be. But there is not an academic who does not have problems with attention, because so much stuff is being written all the time. When I open, you must have had this experience, when I start to look at an article, one of the first things I want to know for myself is this relevant to me? Should I be reading this? Am I wasting my time? Because there are 100 other things I could be reading. So it's a bit like taking a child with attention deficit disorder to a park, and let's assume that there are swings they can go to, there's a slide they can go to, or they can go and see the ducks. And you've only got half an hour, and you know they can't do all of them. So what do we tell people to do as psychologists? We say you've got to scaffold this experience for the for the child. You take the child firmly by the hand, and you say, okay, there's swings, there's slides, there's ducks. We can only go to one of them today. Where are we going to go today? And they'll say, we want to go to the slide. As they're going to the slide, they say, but what about the ducks? What about this? And your job is to get them going in one direction to do one thing. And if you don't, they will run around between things and it'll end in tears. Part of your job as the author of an academic article is to take your scientific reader by the hand through from where they are, which is the top side of the funnel right at the top, where they are as readership of that journal. Take them through the literature to your specific question, your specific method of addressing your question, your specific answer, and then you hold them by the hand and you tell them, you broaden out again to the bottom of the bottom funnel of the double funnel, to explaining to them what your work means. This is in your discussion, what this work means more broadly for them, so that you are using the literature. You are the author of your literature review. You may use 10 articles in your literature review, or however many, 100, doesn't matter, and another person writing a different article with the same article cited in the literature review will write a completely different introduction, because the part of the literature review is to take the reader through the literature, but it's to direct them to the slides or the swing or to your particular question. And it's actually very simple. Regardless of field, forget about all the fancy words on the right, like rationale and all of that. What does your reader want to know from you? Why did I do this study? The steps that I went through, how I did it and what I did, what I found and what it means. Not to me, but to the readership of the journal. That's all you're trying to do. So that underlying structure is there, regardless of whatever field you're in. You always have a reason for doing something. You always have a way of doing something, even if you're not working, if you're doing something quite theoretical and you're not working with data, you still have methods and so on, what you found and what it means. So it's actually incredibly simple. So part of what we've been talking about throughout is your audience. And you have to think about very, very carefully, much more than actually in your thesis or dissertation, who is your audience of that journal. Now, deliberately, you obviously want everybody to be clapping with you. Who reads most so-called international academic journals? It's predominantly old white men like me. The readership of many of the top journals in your field they won't be in South Africa. They will be in the global north. They will tend to be in North America. They will tend to be in the United States. So you've got to think about that. You will write differently if you're writing for the journal called Dementia, which is based at Harvard University, than if you're writing an article on dementia for the South African Journal of Science. You've got to have an idea of who you're talking to. And you've got to enter into a conversation, and there's certain tricks as to how to enter into this conversation and how to take your reader with you. And I'm going to give you some tricks now. The first thing is look at what has recently been published as recently as possible in the journal, even like the online first or the ones where they even give you the accepted proof and so on. Look at that and try and see ways in which your work can link somehow to recent work published in the journal, and so that you can cite that work from that journal, from the journal you are publishing in. You're immediately showing your reviewers you're part of this conversation, okay? And if you can cite that work and show how that work links, and we have a particular advantage in South Africa, which I will tell you about, you are likely also to be writing potentially for your reviewers. You don't know who your reviewers are, but what's the editor going to do? Oh, we've got an article here on, to use a real example that happened with one of our doctoral students a few years ago, on health services for LGBTQ plus people. Then you start where the journal is. So if let me give you an example. I'm using this example for a reason. There's a very good journal called Health and Place, and we were doing some work as part of that AIDS initiative stuff on the particular vulnerabilities of men who have sex with men for HIV in Cape Town. So I mean, Cape Town's a funny place regarding rights of gender and sexual minorities, because it's so split. I mean, it's, in some places, we're the like gay capital of the world, and in other places people can be beaten up, even killed, raped, etc. And we were working with groups of men who have sex with men in townships where it's quite dangerous. There's lots of homophobia. And one of the issues that we faced is we wanted to create safe spaces for them to participate in HIV prevention research. And of course, the minute you create a safe space, people come to know, oh, that's the space where gay people go, and it becomes unsafe. And there's a sort of paradox, and that's what this article was about. And so we wanted to send it to Health and Place, this journal. So we looked at the journal, we thought, what's been published recently in the journal about this particular issue? And as we happen to be very lucky, a very recent article just published in the journal was on men who have sex with men in Cape Town and their struggle to get healthcare in general, as people who receive healthcare in Cape Town. What we could immediately do is we could start with that. We could say, recently in this journal, there's been this piece about the difficulty men who have sex with men in accessing healthcare in townships in Cape Town. So that's, you always knew. But now, this is also an issue for participation in preventive and promotive research, which is what our research is about. And we're going to show you how we can add to that issue, which we did. And the article was published, and in fact, the first author, who was a doctoral student, ended up working for the person who'd been the reviewer on our paper. So you find out as much as you can, you cite from the journal as much as you can, and you try and take your readership with you. I don't have time to go today into which journal you choose, but generally go for the best journal that you can. Don't be too modest, and be very clear about what you can and can't say. I want to leave time for discussion. We can always get back to that. Another thing that's really, really important is write as simply as you can. I mean, there's some examples here that you can have a look at, which have all been published, which are all terrible writing. Don't try and write like other academics. Write as simply as you possibly can. My particular worst thing is when people start writing, "it is believed." That tells you nothing. It is believed that the world is flat. There are plenty, that's true. It is also believed that the world is round. It's lots of things are believed. It tells you absolutely nothing. So if you can, write as simply as you can, in short sentences, use the active voice. When I say words of one syllable, use language that don't use jargon that you don't need. Remember, journals, we have so many things that come to us. Don't write more than you need to. So if we say maximum 6,000 words, if you've finished by the end of 3,000 words, we're delighted we can get 3,000 word articles in for the space of one 6,000 words. If the journal will accept you writing in the first person, we did this. We approached participants in this sort of way. Do that. I know that some of you will have been taught that that's not scientific. That's nonsense. It's absolutely not true. Write so that it's easy for your reader to read your article. Put headings, subheadings, so signpost, simplify. Inexperienced authors tend to want to make their work look complicated, and actually that's not good for academic writing. And remember, you are not saying everything that you know. This is not your life's work. As you've heard, I've published over 450 academic outputs, and I'm just getting started. Your article should be about one thing. This is something I don't know how to attribute it properly from somebody gave to me after one of these talks that I give, but I think it's quite fun. Where the average sentence is easy to understand and the subject matter is complex, is great writing. Where the subject matter is simple and you can understand it, it's honest writing. Where the subject matter is complex and the average sentence is hard to understand, it's typical writing. And unfortunately, and I think particularly for me, I'm a social scientist, so in my field, in the social sciences, often nobody understands the average sentence, and the subject matter is simple, and that's probably just bullshit. Okay, I just want to say a few more things, and then we'll stop. If you want to sustain yourself as an academic writer, you should write often. Lisette Raber, who was she's Emeritus Professor of Journalism at Stellenbosch University, said you have to use the ABC approach, which is the art of applying your buttocks to the chair. What's incredibly important is that writing and editing are not the same. Try not to edit too soon. Get that cop out of your head and keep and save different versions and develop a method. Because you know what? Today you're going to think what I'm writing today is rubbish, and tomorrow you might want to look at it, and then you've lost it. So certainly for me, when I'm writing an academic article, because I have to take my reader by the hand to where I'm going, I'm not sure where I'm going. So where do I start? Generally, I start with my methods and my results. Then it's and my conclusion, and then I write the introduction. I mean, if that it doesn't matter, but you don't have to start at the beginning. And what's really important, and some of you may have found this with your own thesis or your dissertation, you will often rewrite that first chapter. And one of the biggest things is don't worry about formal or academic language, because actually what we want is we want you to communicate, and we want you to get your ideas out there and to tell an easy to understand story for your readership. I've got 3 minutes, and I think I'm going to just stop with this. A lot of people feel quite unhappy about co-publishing with their supervisor, particularly if there's a bad relationship, or if you feel you didn't get a lot of help. I can tell you, having supervised many students, one of the brightest students I ever had, I gave him the choice. I said, do you want to write on your own, or do you want to write with me, and I'll help you, and you'll be first author and I'll be second author? And he said, no, I'm writing this all on my own. I don't need you. I said, fine. And then in the same year, I had another student who wasn't a very strong student. And I said, do you want to co-author with me? And he said, yes, I think I need a lot of help. Well, the one who co-authored with me, we got it into a very nice journal, Social Science and Medicine. It's quite highly cited. It's one of my most highly cited papers, and it's out there. The person who was writing on his own, without experience, never got published. So he's 100% of nothing. So it's generally speaking a really good idea to work with people who are used to the rules it saves time and misery, and actually they like to have a thicker skin. So I always think, like in the struggle years in South Africa, we used to say and this is Stellenbosch, and we code switch at Stellenbosch and we speak Kaaps. These people were lank in die struggle, as people who have long experience of being in the battle that it means to be an academic publisher. And that's who you want to work with. People who are not going to get fazed when reviewers say rude things. And actually, long term, maintaining good relationships academically with people that you worked with is generally a good thing. But we now have about 10. I haven't been able to look because I've only been able to see my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. There are more tips on the PowerPoint which will be made available to you, but I think I'd like to leave the last little while for some discussion and questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Let's give Prof a round of applause, virtual round of applause, please. This was quite a good presentation. It's really, excellent. I always have this idea that any, master's can generate at least one paper. Any master's thesis, any PhD thesis can generate at least two. But I sometimes struggle to understand as to how, students fail to do it. But, you did touch on some of these things to say some people do not want to work with their supervisors. And, for that reason, now it end up, being a challenge for them to publish because they do not have that experience. As you are saying, there's also the kind of thick skin that one needs to develop, and also the understanding, the process. To say being rejected doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. There are quite a number of other journals that you can, publish in. You just need to sort out your document. Don't ignore, what was being said by the previous reviewers. Look at it, take what you think would work for you, and again, publish elsewhere. I was also very happy with the key differences summary between the thesis, and the journal article. And I also liked your reference to the theoretical framework. I also edit one of the journals, and once I receive something with a theoretical framework, I always, know from the word go that this is coming from either a student or an inexperienced researcher. Because in the main, papers don't necessarily have that. And sometimes they actually shoot themselves in the foot because you find that the theoretical framework is not clear as to how it's applied in the study.
Yeah.
So you have to go back to them to say, please, tell us how this is applied in the study. It's not just a standalone thing, but that's a mistake that they make. Any questions, colleagues? Thank you so much, Prof, for this presentation. I really hope that maybe in the future you can redo the same thing. Maybe we can give you 2 hours rather than just 1 hour. Any questions, colleagues? While we are still waiting for questions, another thing that I normally struggle with, Prof, is somebody can do a PhD thesis maybe for 5 years. I'm just making an example. We know minimum is 3 years, but it can be 5, it can be 6.
Yeah.
By the time sometimes they are trying to publish, some of the things have been overtaken by events.
Yes.
I still get
Yes.
Papers talking about COVID-19 and all that, and they are not really contextualized now.
Right. Yeah.
To the current situation. So how do you really deal with that?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic question, and it's. I mean, I'm very glad that you asked that question. And thank you for all the comments. Yeah. A couple of things. I mean, it really, time matters differently in different fields and for different purposes. So, I mean, COVID is a very good example. I am still getting submissions to both journals that I edit about that are just really interesting about how people cope during lockdown, which was at the beginning of COVID and so on, but without contextualizing it today. So if you collected your data for your PhD in 2020 and you finish your PhD in 2026 and your article and you're submitting your article in 2026, the first thing is your literature review has to be up to date, right up to date to 2020 to 2026. You have to contextualize when your data, and it may or may not. So if it was, let me give you the example that I always use. When we transitioned from apartheid to democracy, you would still get articles coming saying, there are 13 departments of health in South Africa, etc., etc. There might have been when the person collected their data, but that was not the case from 1994. So you have, and it's your job to be speaking to your reader as your reader in the journal will pick up the thing. You're not speaking to them 5 years ago. Now, that if you're looking at the age of the Earth, it may not be a huge issue, but you've got to contextualize it in terms of you should always cite. So if you're publishing something in 2026, regardless of when you finished your master's or collected your data, you will have things that you will cite that will be from 2026. You've got to show you're up to date with the literature about how you contextualize that info. You've got to give the kind of context. And I mean, there are things, on COVID's really interesting because, we've now got hantavirus. You've got to explain to your readership now, who's sick and tired of reading about, what happened during lockdown. Why is this relevant now? And if you can't do that, you're not going to get published. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof, for that intervention. I see, Hans, you have your hand up. Kifna, are you able to unmute Hans? Let him speak.
Yes, thank you. Hi. Thank you, Prof, for this presentation. This is extremely helpful. Thank you very much. I am working on my PhD thesis dissertation at this point, and my question relates to using my research in other academic conferences while I am working on my thesis. How does intellectual property work at this point? Can you present a paper at an academic conference? Because sometimes those conferences would then claim intellectual property of your of the work, or what's the correct protocol to use there?
Yeah. I've never. What field are you in, Hans?
I'm in theology.
In theology, oh golly, yeah. I've never known a conference to claim intellectual ownership of things that are said at conferences. And if this happens, and I always say that many of the people who are interested in ethics are the most unethical people. Now, I wonder what I should say about theologians, but sorry for that joke. But no, Hans, no, I mean, check. And discuss it with your supervisor. But generally speaking, the more opportunities that you can have as a doctoral student to present your work and discuss it with people from as wide a group as possible, the better it's going to be for your work. And it's your work. Some supervisors don't like it. I always say to my PhD students, and I've had over 50 of them who've successfully completed, give it to anyone to read. Anyone who wants to read your work, let them comment. It's really helpful. But I think not only should you not be hesitant, but you should be doing it. You should be getting as much feedback as you can along the way, because that's how you're going to improve your work. I don't think that they will claim. I don't see how. I mean, I've run a lot of conferences and I've never claimed intellectual property of a speaker that I've had at conferences that I've run. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
And if you publish in a journal or an article and you use that same information in a dissertation, do you just have to acknowledge that this was published as an article somewhere?
Just check your faculty rules. But yes, the university wants you to do that, and it's helpful to you because you will also get feedback from. I mean, we also have a format of dissertation by publication, which is a separate thing. But the more feedback you can get, the better your work's likely to be. So my first PhD, which was, I had published, I think, 4 articles already before I handed in. There was no such thing as a PhD by publication then, because most people in this call weren't born then. It was a long time ago, but I'd had feedback from top people in the world, and that went into my
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, one way, of course, of doing it is to indicate, even before going to the conference, submitting, indicate to them that you are going to publish from this, so they shouldn't publish it in their conference proceedings, so that there is that understanding before you go and present. There are just 2 other questions. I see we're already at 1, so you'll have to be short in terms of responding, Prof. It says, what routes are there for students who may, for whatever reason, have a contentious relationship with their supervisors, but would still appreciate guidance and support in publishing an article?
Okay. This is a really difficult one. You have to make things clear with your supervisor. Make your own plan. Say, I want to work with this person because I'm going to find it easier. What I would advise you to do, just be strategic, and you say, my name will be first, your name will be there, but in fact, in preparing for publication, I want to bring in this other person who has expertise because of such and such. Do you object? Generally speaking, the supervisor, if they're not getting on with you, would be only too relieved. As long as they see the final version and so on. So just inform them, even if you don't get on with them. Doesn't always work, but I've seen that work well. And as to the next question, I can see a thing about hostile treatment by reviewers. We have to change. We have to change the culture of reviewing. It has got better. It is outrageous how rude reviewers can be, and it's very difficult for me as an editor actually to deal with rude reviewers. We've got to change it. So as you become academics yourself, be kind. Even if you think, and there will be, you will look at something, you'll think, I don't know why the author bothered, which is what somebody said to me. If you don't want to hear that from somebody, never say that to somebody else. We have to change the culture of reviewing. We've really got to work on it. Yeah.
Yes, because it's still us, that are making these comments at the end of the day. So we really need to just change that culture. Sometimes you wonder, where do these people come from? The way that they would comment on other people's work. But thank you so much, Prof. We really appreciate your insights and your perspective. As I'm saying, I hope that we can have more time with you in future.
I love it.
Because this is a very important topic. Students are expected to publish from their thesis and dissertations, and there's hardly any kind of assistance that they are offered. But thank you so much for this and for sharing your perspectives. And thank you so much for the colleagues that joined us in the audience. We really appreciate your support. The next presentation now would be on EndNote, and it starts from 2. And enjoy your lunch. I think everybody now will go on lunch. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's fine.